how to do present your materials, and I'm going to be using an organizing framework of pre, in, and post task. And so what I'm going to give you is an example of that and how I'd like you to present your materials in this class. Okay, so here's the text I've chosen for this example. It's taken from Psychology Today, which is a very accessible journal for articles, and they tend to be short and they tend to be interesting. The particular topic of this article is suicide, which I know could be a sensitive topic for some students. I feel justified in choosing it because suicide culturally is quite a problem in the United States. So learning something about the United States necessarily involves looking at kinds of topics like this. Okay, so let's start with pre-reading, pre-reading task. For native speakers, when we decide to read something in a journal, we've already activated our schemata, our background knowledge. We've looked at the title, we know the kind of newspaper journal it's in, we've looked at any graphics, and we've already set up a series of expectations, of anticipations of what the article is going to be about. For the second language learner, we need to be able to create and provide that set of starting knowledge that most native speakers start with when they read. Some of the things we're going to do in a pre-reading task is that if we're maybe have a theme we're working with, say it's San Francisco, then we're going to integrate with that. We're going to try and contextualize the reading. So a good idea would be a map of San Francisco Bay, because this article talks about the geography of San Francisco and about the two bridges in San Francisco. We're going to pre-teach some important geographic information like Golden Gate Bridge, the Oakland Bridge, the Marin County, University of California at Berkeley, etc., to give students some kind of context. Now, most of this context, Americans, native speakers, will already have to a certain degree. So they're using that background knowledge, they can better understand the reading. So that's what we have to give to the students in these pre-reading tasks. Okay, so for example, here's some a little map of San Francisco, and you can get an idea there of the two bridges, Golden Gate going to Marin County, and then the Oakland Bridge going across to University of Oakland and University of Berkeley. Next thing, we want to exploit any graphics, any captions, visuals, etc. This allows our reader, our students, to begin to predict and anticipate what the reading's about. Prediction and anticipation is a fundamental aspect of reading. We make predictions, we have particular anticipations, and the process of reading is confirming those predictions and those anticipations. Okay, so for example, we got this curious graphic here of a postcard, and it says farewell. Well, what does this mean? We can begin to get students to anticipate what the article is about by looking at this particular graphic. And then we can also look at the title there, the caption, A Dignified Leap. Well, we can explain what a leap is. Students probably won't know what a leap is. They'll know what jump is, but not leap. And so what we're doing is we're creating this set of schemata, this background knowledge, which is so vital in reading comprehension. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pre-teach some vocabulary. Not a lot of vocabulary, but enough to allow students to understand the text and also, in a sense, to anticipate it, because having this set of words is also understanding a little bit more about what the text is about. So I've chosen here suicide, to commit suicide, leap, dignified, pedestrian, psychologist, and landmark. And you need about, I've chosen actually 4 here, but 4 or 5 or 6 words is certainly sufficient for the pre-teaching of vocabulary. Here's one way of doing it, and that's a matching activity. So you've got the particular keywords in the text on one side, and on the other side you've got definitions, and you have to match them. Okay, another way of pre-teaching vocabulary is to do a fill in the blank, and this is a nice little summary of what the article is about. So by understanding the words and putting them in here, students also get a little bit of a summary of what they're going to read. So pre-teaching vocabulary is an important thing to do. 5 or 6 words is sufficient. Next, we move to the in-reading task. And a good way of approaching the in-reading task is to think about going from extensive to intensive reading. What I mean by extensive here is global or gist reading, and by intensive, I mean focusing on things like vocabulary and grammar and on specific information. So if we start with a gist type a reading task, we can use this one, for example. Read the article, first paragraph quickly, and find out why the postcard says farewell. So we may have set that up as the reading task. Why does it say farewell? Well, you can read this quickly and you get some idea of why it says farewell. It's about suicide. Next, we can try and look at some of the kind of discourse structure of the particular text. I'm talking about formal schemata. This is the way that a particular text is organized. And so, for example, we can focus on the first paragraph and fill in the information. I filled in the information already. So what we would give to the students would be what we call a graphic organizer, Golden Gate Bay Bridge, and then we want them to read and find the specific information: number of suicides since 1930s, height above the water. So this is important information in the text because it compares the 2 bridges and it poses a particular problem. So we can see that the Golden Gate has 700 suicides since the 1930s, and Bay Bridge has only 140 in comparison, but they're both 200 feet above the water. So what's the problem here? Why is it there are more suicides on the Golden Gate? So that gives another reading purpose for students to go further into text and to find out the answer to that question about why do suicides prefer the Golden Gate. Okay, a very common way of doing reading of texts, testing comprehension of text, is reading comprehension questions. I would like you to try and avoid them as much as possible. You may get to use them, but try and do a graphic organizer. And a graphic organizer is very good at directing students to the particular structure, the discourse structure of the text. So this particular text has set out a problem, and now in the rest of the text it gives 2 explanations. Okay, explanation number 1, and then it provides evidence against this theory, and then we have explanation 2, and we have evidence for this theory. So what we're going to invite the student to do now is to take notes and put those notes into those boxes. And once they've got those particular notes, what they're doing is understanding the particular discourse structure of this particular reading text. Another important part of reading is personalization. Can you get some kind of personalized response from your students? And that is trying to match the content of the reading to some of their own particular experience. For example, here, once we've looked at the explanations in the reading text, maybe there are other explanations. Well, maybe students can contribute these. Now we're going to move on to more intensive reading activities. So we've looked at the content, that's the extensive part of the reading. Now we're going to look at the formal features, and this is part of more intensive reading. So any text gives you a way of looking at vocabulary items. I've given you 3 different particular ways of looking at vocabulary here. First, with synonyms. Find the words which mean the same as the following in the text. And then we can go on to antonyms, for example. Look for words which mean the opposite of the following, and then C, some work on paraphrase. Okay, the next particular focus, intensive focus on form, is grammar. Every text will illustrate some aspect of grammar. Look for it in the text. Don't impose the grammar on the text, but let the text show you why that particular text is interesting from a particular focus on form, a focus on grammar. So, for example, what I've focused on here is the use of the present perfect. And I've used a device here of actually writing a little couple of sentences which have grammatical mistakes in them, and I'm inviting students to correct the mistake. So a common mistake is to use past tense instead of present perfect, which is a very difficult tense. So that's our focus on grammar. Every text has something you can pull out to illustrate some aspect of grammar. So now we get to the post-reading task. And what we're going to do, we've read it, we've talked about it, we've looked at the formal features. We want to connect it to integrate and recycle the content, the vocabulary, so it's not just a one-off thing. And we want to go on to some kind of different skill. So let's take the content area, let's take the vocabulary, and let's take maybe the grammar as well, and see if we can practice that new language and content in a different skill area. So for example, we could have some kind of discussion. We could ask students to talk about suicide landmarks in their own countries. And we could also get onto this very interesting discussion of the comparison of suicide rates in different countries. Why is the suicide rate in the United States comparatively high compared with other countries? Or we could do some listening. And I'm just throwing this out here. Maybe you want, maybe this will be a difficult listen, I don't know, but you could have a look at the suicide scene in Romeo and Juliet. Maybe the DiCaprio version, the movie version. We could go on to more reading, but that's still the same skill, and we could look at more other meaningful landmarks in the United States. And then what about writing? We've got all that content. Let's see if we can recycle it in some kind of written practice. So here's a suggestion. We could provide a report to the San Francisco City Council dealing with the problem of suicide in the city and suggesting ways of preventing suicide on the 2 bridges. Okay, so what we've done there is when we've presented our material, we've done our reading, we're not just going to put it away. We're going to connect it. We're going to integrate it. We're going to recycle. We're going to move on to a different skill, and we're going to recycle that particular content and that particular vocabulary.